Alright, so I have a lot of questions about fermenting under pressure since I got this fermentasaurus here. And I've been giving some tips and tricks on how I do it, but let me just point it out real quick. First, benefits of fermenting under pressure. Let me turn this around. Fermenting under pressure, benefits are, number one, fermenting a lager yeast at higher temperature and not getting really that much off flavors at all. Second off, you can do other yeasts like ale yeast at a higher temperature if you live in a warmer climate, and they can actually ferment at a normal rate. They're not going to blow through all the really simple fermentable, super fermentable sugars and then kind of die out and crap out on you, and leaving you with a sweet wort. Or produce a whole bunch of off flavors and esters, and then you are literally just drinking a very it's not intended as what you want it to be intended as. The third thing is I can ferment under pressure and put the right amount of volume of CO2 that's supposed to be on that beer, and then when I crash it with cold crashing, all that CO2 gets absorbed into the beer, and I can actually serve right off of this vessel. It's like a unitank. So that's actually pretty cool. So let me show you what I do. First thing, sanitize and clean and then completely sanitize. I use Star San. I swish it around a lot and dump it back in. I usually keep a bucket full of Star San, lasts about a month, and I use it on everything. Second, after I fill it all up, I then take my CO2 tank, put it to about 30 psi. This is actually sitting at, let's see, turn it on, sitting at 30 psi. Okay, I hook up my CO2 directly to the top, pressurize this bad boy. Hear that? That's tight. It's very tight. Like a snare drum. These are rated up to 35, even like 50 psi. So, and they actually tell you, I think it's 55 psi you're supposed to test it at when you hydro test it. I put this ball lock valve, not ball lock, you know what I'm talking about. It's not pin lock, it's the ball valve one. I put that one on, pressurize it to 30 psi, and then I put the spunding valve on. I picked this up for more beer, and I picked up a new gauge with liquid inside because the old one actually crapped out on me and didn't really give me the right PSI rating. So what I do is I put it to about 30 PSI, and based upon, I'm sure you guys have seen the chart, if you search it, volumes of CO2 versus temperature. And there'll be like a little linear graph that starts all the way at the top and then kind of comes down like this, with like a green section in it, and the temperature will be on the side, and the volumes of CO2, the pressure will be all on the top, and the higher the pressure and the higher the temperature will give you the same volume of CO2 as a lower temperature and a lower volume of CO2. So at 38 degrees at 12 psi you're getting like 2.5 volumes of CO2. If you're at 65 degrees with 26 psi, you got 2.5 volumes of CO2. So that's what I use based upon my fermenting temperature and the pressure that's inside. This tank, when it's done fermenting, I can put a picnic tap on here and serve off after it's cold crashed, because the cold crashing will allow the CO2 to absorb into the beer, and it'll be fully carbonated. At, say, 34 degrees, it'll be 2.5, or 38 degrees, it'll be 2.5 volumes of CO2, because it fermented at 65 degrees at 26 psi. So that's really cool. Second off, this British ale yeast too that I have in here on this bitter won't give me tons of esters. It will give me a little bit of esters, but not a lot. So I could crank this temperature up, get a little bit more esters out of the yeast, and have the same PSI up on top. Or what I could do is lower the temperature and lower the PSI, but then I'll have an undercarbonated beer. So I like to have carbonated beer when I'm ready to go. That's why I can probably pump this one out at a 1042 OG down to, you know, a 1010, 1012, no problem, in 7 days. Cold crush for a day, 2 days, and I can literally drink this beer in a week. So that's really cool. So first thing, clean, sanitize the fermenter. Fill it full up to your serving amount. Then pressurize with a CO2 tank to your PSI based upon your fermenting temperature. I'm fermenting right now at about 80 degrees. This is a bitter. It's going to be a low carbonated beer. So that's why it's sitting right around 22, 20, it's about 22 PSI. That should give me just under 2 volumes of CO2. It will be ready to go. I'm not going to suppress a ton of the esters because it's at a high temperature and a lower pressure than I normally do. And when I'm done with this, I can just pressure transfer from here directly into my keg, and I'm ready to go. The way that I do the temperature is with this Johnson controller. Right now you see it's sitting at 81 degrees. I have a thermocoupler or temperature probe right here. It's taped onto the side, and I have 1.5 inch foam that I made this little box out of. And as you can see, I have a top that the lid sticks out of, and then a top box that sits on top of the spunding valve. And that's how I do it. Nice and simple. Fermentasaurus saves the day. Great product. And I definitely will use this to ferment unless I'm doing wine that I do in a big bucket, or if I have to dry hop with a ton of hops, I usually end up using a carboy down here. Or I don't recommend these Kegco ones because there's a lot of flaws in the glass, but I usually go on the buckets for like a very high dry hop beer. And if you, let me show you, I actually have down here, I have a racking cane that has a CO2 disconnect on it that I place down inside on one of the carboys. I pressurize with about 1-2 psi, and it comes right out the top. I can run it right into my keg, and that usually works the best for me. So hopefully that helps you guys. All right, have a good one. This thing should be done about by the time I get back from my trip to Dallas and next weekend, and I'll have a nice fresh yeast cake down there in that collector. And I'm going to probably see about brewing up a nice English barley wine and throwing it on top of that fresh yeast cake. This is basically a big starter because I picked up a pack of the British Ale Yeast 2 from Brewer Dude, and it came in and it was, the package said manufactured back in August. And, well, July and August were the two that I have. I think this one was August. And it's November now, so it's half viable. Just using a small beer, 1042. Get it going. Then I'm gonna go ahead and rack it onto like an 1110, 1108 barley wine. All right, more to come. I'll let you know how this beer turns out.